The eruption of Mount Vesuvius in late 79 AD was a natural disaster of epic proportions. Justifiably, much attention is focused on the unfolding of the event itself, whose very essence is quite literally frozen in time at the sites of Pompeii and Herculaneum. But not all who witnessed that day were destined to face such a doom. So today, let us focus on the story of the survivors, the rescuers, and the reaction of the ancient world in the aftermath of Mount Vesuvius.
When making these documentaries, I spent a lot of time online trawling websites for research, for image references, for maps, subscribing to get access to articles, and all kinds of content. I'm basically a magnet out there for scammers and people trying to scalp my information. Unfortunately, my Chrome notification bar tells me my passwords have been compromised. I get a lot of spam calls, a lot of oddly specific ads, and I'm really nervous about my information being out there, and I'm sure you are too. And that brings us to today's sponsor, Aura. Aura can help identify data brokers exposing your information and submit opt-out requests on your behalf. Brokers are actually legally obligated to follow these orders, but they make it very hard for you and me to do so, and that's where Aura steps in to make the process as simple and easy as possible, and they do it for you. You can try Aura for yourself using my link. I really think it's worth it, and it does so much more to protect you and your family from online threats you can't see. It's really easy to set up, so you don't have to download several different apps to get things like parental control, antivirus, VPN, password management, identity theft, insurance, and more. You get everything all at once at an affordable price. One of my favorite features for Aura is its ability to search the dark web for you, so you can see what little morsels of your private information have made it into the seedy underbelly of the internet. So definitely check it out and let Aura do the hard work of protecting you and the internet for you, so you can focus on other tasks. I know for me, that is vitally important, as I would much rather spend my time doing other things and not having to worry about if someone's thieving information out of my back pocket. So you can either let people continue to exploit and profit off your private information, or you can go to aura.com/invicta or click the link below to start your 2-week free trial. Enjoy! But before we jump to the eruption and aftermath of Mount Vesuvius, it will be worth laying the groundwork for the event. For starters, one might ask, what did the Romans even think of volcanoes in the first place? To a certain extent, these were known phenomena, and stories of smoking mountains abounded in the general consciousness. In fact, Italy itself lay close to several volcanic sites. The Aeolian Islands were one such archipelago of active hotspots around which ships sailed routinely. But none could overshadow the prominence of Mount Etna, which dominated the island of Sicily. Its eruptions had long helped fertilize the farmlands of its foothills, and the locals were well acquainted with its rumblings. Small summit and flank eruptions are actually quite regular, and more spectacular events can happen every few generations. For instance, on one notable occasion, the eruption of Mount Etna in 397 BC had even waylaid a Carthaginian army as it made war upon the Greeks. By the time of the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD, the Romans had long been in control of Sicily and were themselves now subject to its temperamental nature. For instance, in 122 BC, explosions so damaged the nearby town of Catania that the Romans exempted it from taxes to aid in reconstruction efforts. But the most detailed account we have from ancient observations of volcanic activity actually comes from an anonymous poem entitled The Etna from the early 1st century AD. In it, the author describes an eruption as follows, quote, "The eruption is announced by a deep rumbling underground, accompanied with fire. As soon as it stirs its forces and threatens havoc, it flies in different directions, dragging at once the soil with it, smitten in its branches. Then shall you think fit to flee in panic and yield place to the divine event. From the safety of a hill, you will be able to observe all. For on a sudden, the conflagration blazes out, loaded with its spoils, masses of burning matter advance, mutilated lumps of falling rock roll forth and whirl dark shoals of sand. They present vague shapes in human likeness. Some of the stones suggest the defeated warrior, some a gallant host armed for a standing fight, unassailed by the flames. A host of sparks flash forth at every blow. The glowing rocks fall with undiminished heat. Look, you see, the flashes in the distance. Look, raining down in the distance." Then the lava liquid begins to boil hotter, and at last to advance more in a fashion of a gentle stream, as it lets its waves course down the slopes of the hills. By stages the waves advance some twice 6 miles. Nay, nothing can recall them, nothing checks these determined fires, no mass can hold them. Now, woodland and crag, here again earth and soil are in the flood. The lava streams come to a standstill inside their margins and harden as they cool. Slowly, the fires shrink, and the appearance of a waving harvest of flame is lost. Understandably, such eruptions were the source of many a tale and legend. For instance, a surviving story tells of how during one of Etna's many eruptions, 2 boys bravely ran into a burning house to save their parents. Soon after, however, lava was upon them all. Luckily, the gods looked kindly upon this act of fidelity, splitting the oncoming flows and allowing them to escape. But this was not the only case of gods and volcanoes colliding. In fact, the Romans had many mythologies which sought to explain the cause for volcanoes. One tradition held that Vulcan, the god of fire, metalworking, and smithing, resided in the bowels of the mountain, its eruptions being the product of his tireless work upon his forge. Another tradition claimed that it was instead the home of cyclopses, giants, and monsters who long ago built the volcanoes to wage war upon the heavens. Countless more ideas were offered as to the fire mountain's magical properties. And yet, there were certainly more skeptical individuals who attempted to explain such phenomena with natural sciences. The same poem we quoted from earlier, for instance, makes a strong argument for the existence of vast chasms and tunnels beneath the earth, which, like the veins of some great organism, allows for the circulation of air currents within the earth. These, the author argues, can be driven into violent motion by all manner of forces, such as the collapse of a cavern, the evaporation of moisture, and more. The poem then concludes, quote, "The volcanic wind thus feels the impact of the struggle which compresses it, wraps its own strength within its heavy mass, and impels its close-packed particles through fiery passages. Wherever a path is found, it speeds on until, driven by the confluent airstream, as by so many forcing pumps, it leaps forth and all over discharges itself in blasts of angry fire." Not a bad guess for the time. The author then goes on to describe how people at the time were quite familiar with the formation of volcanic rocks, of obsidian and pumice, and sulfur and lava, and how they fertilized the soil. Armed with such information, it seems that perhaps some might have been prepared for the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Indeed, there had been some precedent for this. Plutarch wrote of the night sky being on fire near Naples around the year 217 BC, while Silius Italicus mentioned in his epic poem Punica that Vesuvius had thundered and produced flames worthy of Mount Etna in that same year. Yet over nearly 300 years, this event faded into memory, and more recent authors regarded such fires as ancient history. Yet perhaps some still wondered if it might still reawaken. The poem Etna actually alludes to this possibility when discussing the fuel which might feed such an explosion. Quote, "Judge likewise by special places, take your stand by similar volcanic hollows. These have a larger store of natural fuel, but because this species of stone has nowhere contributed its resources, the fire has died away. Mount Epomeo in the Bay of Naples, we are told, once blazed out in sudden treachery, though today its summit is quenched. Another witness is the region between Neapolis and Cumae, now cooled for many a year, though sulfur wells forth unceasingly in rich abundance. It is gathered for merchandise, so much more plentiful it is here than on Etna, but it rarely gives out smoke. If kindled, it burns with difficulty. For the supply, feeds but for a little the short-lived flames." Unfortunately, in this assessment, the author would be terribly mistaken. Yet while the Romans of the region may have been unaware of this specific disaster which lay dormant beside them, they were not unfamiliar with other disasters. In fact, a major earthquake had hit Pompeii in 65 AD, the damage of which is still visible in the ruins today. Over the following years, further tremors continued. This helped to further desensitize the Romans, who were already quite used to the rumblings in the region of Campania. Yet researchers believe that around late 79 AD, 4 days prior to the eruption, these tremors became ever more frequent. Some may have taken heed of such warning signs, but to many, they went unrecognized as signs of impending doom. Thus, the many peoples in the shadow of Vesuvius went about their business. We shall now take a brief accounting of these groups. To the north of the Bay of Naples lay the city of Neapolis, with a population of well over 30,000. It was a wealthy place, adorned with great villas, temples, baths, and arenas, with a direct road connecting it to the capital. To its west lay the infamous party towns of Baiae and Puteoli, where many a Roman came to relax on vacation. To its east was the seaside town of Herculaneum of just 5,000, which lay directly between the feet of Vesuvius and the shore. Further east was the town of Pompeii along the river Sarno, with a population of around 15,000. Further beyond were various other villages nestled into the nearby mountains, sprawling across the valley floor, or even climbing the slopes of Vesuvius itself with all manner of gardens, vineyards, and estates. But the idyllic scene would not last long.
What happened next was a 2-day multi-phase event, which is the subject of much academic debate. Our one eyewitness, Pliny the Younger, indicates that on the morning of the first day, all appeared normal. However, most timelines tend to agree that around noon, smoke began to billow from atop the mountain. This was followed shortly thereafter by an initial explosion which threw up a high column of hot gas, ash, and pumice. Studies estimate its maximum height that day at around 15 to 30 kilometers tall. As these ascended into the atmosphere, they began to spread across the skyline like black ink on thirsting paper. For those across the Bay of Naples, this must have been an incredible sight to behold. Many were struck in stupefied awe, watching as, in the words of Pliny the Younger, quote, like an umbrella pine tree it rose to a great height, on a sort of trunk, and split off into branches. Those closer to the event itself would have been in for an even greater shock. Here is how the account of Cassius Dio puts it, quote, then a sudden, portentous crash was heard, as if the mountains were collapsing, and first, enormous stones were thrown up to reach the height of the mountain tops themselves. Then, great quantities of fire, and endless smoke so that the whole sky was shaded, the sun completely hidden as if eclipsed. Some thought the giants were rising in revolt, for many of their forms could be seen through the smoke, and, in addition, a sound of trumpets was heard. Others thought the whole universe was being consumed by chaos or fire. Therefore they fled, some from their houses into the streets, some from outside, indoors, from the sea inland, and from there to the sea, since in their confusion they thought that wherever they went was not safer than where they were. From this, we can only begin to grasp the unimaginable chaos of the scene. Many would have been gripped by the animalistic instinct to flee. Here, the poem Etna once more provides insight. Quote, then every man strives to save his goods with such courage and strength as avails him to snatch at them. One groans beneath the burden of gold. Another collects his arms and piles them again about his foolish neck. Another, faint under what he has seized, has his flight hindered by his poems. Here, the poverty-stricken man hastens nimbly beneath the lightest of loads. Everyone makes for safety with what he held dear upon his shoulders. Thus, as crowds swarmed into the streets, many would have been separated or crushed by the whirling flood of bodies making their way for the exits of the town or towards the nearest docks. Soon, the great quantities of ash and pumice would begin to rain down from the sky. In doing so, it would have begun to ignite the fields, forests, and hills, thus starting the process of turning the environment into a living hell. Given such chaos, it should be no surprise that many chose to ride out the storm inside their homes, boarding up the windows as best they could and hoping for the best. At this time, many would have turned to their gods, either in quiet, desperate prayers within the shadows of some dark interior, or out in the open view of the hellish spectacle with fervent displays of propitiation, beseeching the pity and intervention of the deities. Others, consumed by fear, screamed that the gods were dead or had decided to end the world. However, in this moment of need, there would have also been many mortal saviors. Good Samaritans who helped give comfort to their neighbors in their homes, or lent a wagon, horse, or ship to the refugees, attempting to make good on their escape. In these matters, the local Roman government would have also been there to coordinate the immediate evacuation and rescue efforts. This is best captured by the eyewitness account of Pliny the Younger, who wrote a letter to Plutarch describing the exploits of his uncle, Pliny the Elder. At the time of the eruption, this statesman was the governing prefect, located in the town of Misenum with a small Roman fleet. What follows will be a condensed, adapted narrative of this account. As the eruption began, the prefect immediately put on his sandals, going to a higher point for a better view. He was known for his habit of writing down all manner of natural phenomena, and this was one he had never seen in person. After a short while watching the cloud growing and oddly colored, he called for a servant to prepare one of his ships so that he could go inspect it in person. As Pliny left the house, heading down to the docks, a breathless messenger caught him. The note was from Rectina, the wife of Bassus, a family friend who lived in a villa at the base of the erupting mountain. With no easy escape, She begged for his help. At this news, the prefect grasped the severity of the situation and immediately changed his plans. Rather than just his own galley, he had every available ship launched immediately. What had begun as a scientific mission was now a full-fledged rescue operation. As the vessels set off, their voyage was made easy by the rising cloud which guided the fleet and the southeasterly winds which sped their travel. On the approach, the ever-curious Pliny made sure to note his experiences for a potential new addition to his book on natural history, which was already 37 volumes in length. But with each passing minute, the gravity of the situation became more dire. Boats of all kinds were desperately fleeing in the opposite direction, escaping the light shower that had begun to fall. Every minute the rescue fleet sailed closer, the falling ash thickened and heated. It began to be mixed with stone, pumice, and flint, showering the Romans with a deadly hail. The captain of the ship came to Pliny, his eyes wide with fear, begging the prefect to allow the fleet to turn back. His response was laconic. "Fortune favors the bold. Make for Pompeianus." And with that, the rescuers made for the senator's residence at the port of Stabii, less than 3 miles from Pompeii. When he landed, the situation was dire. Panic reigned in the streets and across the countryside. Lava and blazes lit the sky, decorating the slopes of Mount Vesuvius. Closer, fires were evident as well, caused by the perpetual rain of burning ash which had increased to a nearly choking degree. The streets were filled with people staggering through, attempting to reach the harbors, attempting to reach some semblance of safety. The regular earthquakes staggered them all, and people were trampled underfoot without any notice from the crowds. Lightning flashed with the blackened sky, the sun only rarely visible as a blood-red orb in the midst of the field of ash. It was then that Pliny realized the reality of his own situation. As a prefect, his duty was to maintain the peace in any way possible. As such, he now embraced the senator, encouraging him and the public while his marines did their best to enforce order. Yet as these attempted to fill the fleet with refugees, it soon proved evident that an escape would not be possible. The crushing weight of thousands was bogging down operations, while the regular earthquakes had thrown the seas into havoc and the winds blew directly on shore. They were all trapped until conditions improved. Now, as in battle, Pliny knew that a retreat by the commander would cause the panic disintegration of his entire force. He therefore steeled his nerves and held his ground, acting as if everything were normal. To this end, he now brought his belongings ashore and bade Pompeianus to host him in his villa with a bath and a dinner. The message was clear. He was not going anywhere. The calm, unfortunately, could only go so far. Despite acting as if everything were normal, the manor was filling with debris from the skies, and Pliny himself began to break out in fits of loud coughing. It was at this point that his entourage now begged him to leave. Tying pillows to their heads to protect themselves from falling stones, they made their way down to the shores once more, hoping that the ships might be able to depart. Unfortunately, conditions had only gotten worse. Suddenly, a thick wave of smoke and noxious fumes came upon the party. The elderly Pliny fell, suffocated by the smoke, while the rest of his company fled desperately into the coming night. When next they found the statesman, he would be dead. This experience was characteristic of all who yet remained in the immediate vicinity of Vesuvius. The clouds of dust, which had initially been thrown up at noon, were now increasingly falling down upon the world, raising ambient temperatures and heating roof tiles to an estimated 120 degrees Celsius. This was initially worse for Pompeii, which lay downwind of the eruption. However, as the immense clouds collapsed, they would soon unleash their greatest devastation yet, the pyroclastic surges. So ended the first day of the Aftermath of Vesuvius. I hope you've appreciated this more humanizing look at this ancient disaster. I always find it unsettling how easily we overlook the personal aspects of history, and hope our efforts on the channel can continue to bring the past to life. To do so, we can certainly use your help on our Patreon, where support gets you HD downloads of all our art, script previews, and community polls. A big thanks to the current patrons for funding the channel, and to the researchers, writers, and artists for making this episode possible. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content, and check out these other related episodes. See you in the next one.